It's time to begin the regular meeting of the Metropolitan Council. Today is Wednesday, February 14th, 2018, and I call this meeting to order. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Look at the cute little hearts.
Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes from our January 24th meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Moved and a second? Did I hear the second? Who was the second? Wendy. Oh, thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. At this point on the agenda, we members of the public who wish to address the council and members not on the agenda may do so. I would just ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes, and we don't have anyone signed up, but I just wanted to make sure we provide the opportunity. Does anyone wish to address the council? Okay. Not seeing anyone wishing to address the council. We don't have any items on the consent agenda, so we'll move on to the reports of the standing committees. And we'll start with community development. Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee has one item for the council's consideration tonight. That is item 2018-31. It is an approval of Baytown Township's 2040 Comprehensive Plan update. This is the first community to submit their comprehensive plan update in this current cycle, and so I think that's notable in itself. Madam Chair, council staff found that the township's 2040 plan conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed amendment to the community designation, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. The committee agreed with that finding, set of findings, and would, as a result, make the following motion. There are 3 pieces to this. First, authorize Baytown Township to place the 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Secondly, revise the community designation for the central portion of Baytown Township as shown in the committee report from diversified rural to rural residential. And then finally, advise the township to implement the advisory comments in the review record for parks, transportation, surface water management, and housing. So I'd like to move that on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Member Commerce. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Member Dorfman.
Madam Chair, thank you. And unfortunately, I missed the Community Development Committee where this was discussed, so I was wondering if somebody could briefly tell me the difference between diversified rural and rural residential and that impact. Thank you.
Great. Do we have anyone from staff that can explain that? Ms. Brajas, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Dorfman. Diversified rural is community designation for communities that are characterized by large lot residential, usually 10 acres in size or greater, hobby farms and other types of rural uses. These areas are typically or often are overlain with our long-term service area, but not always. Rural residential are areas around the region that already have a development pattern of 1 to 2 acre lot sizes and have had that historic pattern for some time. In some cases, actually in these places never are overlain with our long-term service area either.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just follow up, Lisa, and the city's rationale for making this change?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, this is an ongoing issue in Baytown Township related to planning for the St. Croix Valley wastewater treatment plant, and stemming back from the 2030 round of comprehensive planning where we had negotiations with the township to reserve some land so that we might consider potential expansion of that plant and having additional land available for that. Changes in regulatory standards and other physical restraints on the land around that plant have restricted our ability to provide as much service as we had intended originally.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions or comments on this item? I think just congratulate Baytown Township for being the first community to submit their comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. The next standing committee report is from the Environment Committee. Member Rummel.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Business item 2017-42 regards reclaimed water agreements with Enerchem through a Memorandum of Understanding and a design cost deposit agreement. MCES and Enerchem have been discussing potential reclaimed water service. Enerchem has expressed interest in obtaining reclaimed water service from MCES at approximately 1.6 million gallons per day for industrial processes and cooling water. In order to move forward with the work, a request is being made to create a Memorandum of Understanding. This MOU outlines the understandings and expectations of developing the project, as well as the design cost deposit agreement. Therefore, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorizes staff to negotiate the Memorandum of Understanding and a design cost deposit agreement with Enerchem related to reclaimed water service.
Great. Hearing the motion from the committee, is there a second? Second. Any questions or comments on this item? Any discussion? Sorry. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. The next is the Management Committee report, and Councilmember Chavez is not here. Is there anyone here?
I believe that Member Kramer is doing that now, so maybe if we went to the next item,
Yep.
so you could.
Great. So we'll just move on to Transportation. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2018-5 is a same week item. It deals with the tenant advisory services for the Southwest LRT project to assist eligible owners and tenants with the relocation process. The contracts were competitively procured in 2014, and it was estimated that there would be 100 displacees. Now that the project has a relocation activity underway, the contractors identified additional displacees that are eligible for relocation support and reimbursement under the Uniform Relocation Act. As a result, the number of displacees has increased from the original estimate of 100 to over 170. The Southwest Project Office is requesting sole source authority to amend six of the existing contracts because these consultants are already familiar with the project process, property owners, and businesses to be relocated. This provides for continuity in current and relocation plans and ensures that the businesses are relocated in a timely manner. I therefore move, Madam Chair, that the Metropolitan Council approve sole source contract amendments to 6 property owner and tenant advisory services contracts to increase the amounts as described in the business item.
Second.
Thank you, Member Rodriguez. Thank you for the second. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. 2018-23, same week, deals with the contract for design and construction engineering of the C line and associated street improvements on Penn Avenue. Agreement 15I-080 was executed in 2016 to accept up to $1,846,000 in Hennepin County funds for engineering costs of non-BRT portions. Engineering costs for all BRT components of the intersection are funded by Metro Transit. Since that time, Hennepin County has added 0.6 miles of full street reconstruction to the scope of the combined project. Additional Hennepin County design and construction engineering funds are needed for this added scope. I therefore move, Madam Chair, that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment 1 to Agreement 15I-080 with Hennepin County, increasing the maximum county participation by $254,000 up to an amount not to exceed $2,100,000.
Thank you, Member Rodriguez. Is there a second?
Second?
Moved and seconded. All, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Member Rodriguez, the third item.
Last one, 2018-39, same week, deals with the C Line BRT project as well, and Penn Avenue Road Reconstruction Project that includes 33 C Line platforms, the full reconstruction of 8 intersections, and a 0.6-mile street segment on Penn Avenue. As noted in the earlier motion, non-BRT work on Penn Avenue is funded by a cooperative construction agreement with Hennepin County. On January 10, 2018, 5 bids were received and opened publicly, ranging from $12,976,110 to $15,277,826. The low responsive base bid from Thomas & Sons Construction and is 25% less than the engineer's estimate before applied contingency. I therefore move, Madam Chair, that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 17P256 with Thomas and Sons Construction for the construction of the Sea Line BRT and Penn Avenue Road Construction Project at a cost of $12,976,110.
Thank you.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Member Munt.
Madam Chair, I just want to note for folks that Thomas and Sons, the low bidder, is a union construction firm that fairly pays its workers.
Thank you. Any other discussion points? I would just say this is an exciting milestone for the project, and we're looking forward to getting this project in construction this year. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. I think we'll go back to the Management Committee.
Sure. So business item 2018-24, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve the revisions to the non-represented plan effective December 30th, 2017, incorporating the revisions summarized below. The rationale that non-rep plan is reviewed on an annual basis to reflect necessary changes and updates. Those are listed in the recommendations, a summary of revisions from Section 2, Section 5, Section 7, 9, 10, and also Appendix B and Appendix C. Our Thrive lens is the plan falls within the financial parameters established by the Council for managing labor costs. The plan demonstrates efficient and effective management of public financial resources, and the plan represents fair and reasonable total compensation and demonstrates the Council's commitment to invest in its employees. The funding and recommended salary increases are within the 2018 adopted operating budget and are consistent with the parameters established by the Management Committee, and I would ask for your approval on that item.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. Next item on the agenda, we have other business. It's an information item on the Transportation Policy Plan update. So if we could invite Ms. Venovitz, Ms. Fury, Cole potentially, and Steve Peterson.
Madam Chair and members, Amy Vanowitz with
Welcome.
MTS here today. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
So we're going to get you out of here in plenty of time to go have your dinner with your significant others or whoever. So as you said, we're here today to provide an update on the TPP update, which we kicked off right around this time last year with the Committee of the Whole. I think we've been to 2 Committee of the Wholes since, and we have recently hit some pretty big milestones on the TPP update. So we wanted to come here and fill you in on where we're at and specifically talk to you about the overview, which was a pretty significant revision. And Michelle Fury will be going through that today and was handing it out around the table too. A couple things I did want to note. I forgot to change this for us. Some of the big milestones we've hit, we have 14 technical chapters, which have all been revised, edited with red lines, and we provided those to TAC Planning and have received comments back on the majority of those. And we are now in the process of re-editing those chapters with a final version going out to TAC Planning on March 8th. So that is really the next big date where we will get a recommendation on the draft TPP on the technical chapters and also the overview that you'll hear about today. And then from March 8th on, we will continue the process through the full TAC, TAB, and Transportation Committee. But at this point, don't have something scheduled with the full council again until likely early or late May, when we will come back and talk to you about some projects that either came out of the legislative session or came out of the corridors of commerce, MnDOT's process to select some additional major projects. So that would be late May. And then we will be asking the Transportation Committee and the full council to recommend and approve the draft TPP for public review and comment in June. So between now and June, you won't be hearing a lot from us, which is maybe good. But we do want to let you know that if we're moving through the TAC and TAB process, so there's a lot going on out in the community. We're getting a lot of feedback from counties and cities. So if you are hearing things from your constituents or you have questions about what's in the plan, ask today, but also follow up with us and we can fill you in on what the issues arising are. So with that, I will, well, I guess as a quick review, and we have brought this to you before, this plan is a very, what we call focused and limited update to the TPP for many reasons. One of the primary ones being that the local communities are in the middle of their comprehensive reviews, and having a large plan update at this point in time did not make a lot of sense. So this plan update focuses primarily on updates to the revenue forecast, changes due to CTIP disbanding and the new county sales tax, new highway revenues that were passed by the 2017 legislature, and then also updating our growth assumptions for many of the revenue sources. That is one of the major changes. Also, the investments, you'll hear about those today, changes in major highway and transit investments. The planning study results we have shared with you in the past, so we won't be going into detail on any of those changes today, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. And then, of course, the big change being the reworking of the overview. With that, I will turn it over to Michelle to go over that with you.
So to refresh your memory, the overview of the Transportation Policy Plan is this document that we presented last, or that we created last time we updated the plan. It's basically about 100 pages of really the higher level themes across the larger transportation policy plan. So the idea is to pull up the key pieces of information that we need to know in order to understand what the plan does, but it leaves the rest of the detail for the much more detailed sections and specific chapters on all of the modes that are in the plan. As Amy said, because this is a fairly limited update, that gives us an opportunity to rework the content in this part of the document to make sure that it's meeting a number of not only community needs, but expectations for communicating the vision for transportation in the region. What you see in front of you, as Amy said, is the first draft that we've released for technical partners to review, and it has been reviewed internally, obviously, but we're now taking it out to the world to see if we're hitting the mark on some of the major pieces. It is a really good time for any feedback that you have, because as Amy said, in the next few months, we're going to really be digging in with external constituencies. So it's a great time to be making some changes. And we're already hearing about some small things, but we'll certainly hear about more as we move forward. So what we've done with the overview is reorganized and updated the content in it, primarily new data where it's relevant, the new investment pieces, as Amy mentioned, updated challenges and opportunities, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then really taking a good hard look at plain language and making sure that it's organized well. We also learned, as you always do when you produce something like this, that there's redundancy that doesn't necessarily clarify key pieces. So we're trying to remove some of that stuff and make it a little bit less dense, a little bit more consumable. It is shorter than the previous one, which was a goal, so yay. And it will also have some new illustrations, which I'll also talk about in a little bit. As I mentioned, the challenges and opportunities section is probably the one place where all of the content is new. And the goals section, which is pretty fundamental to a transportation plan like this one, is primarily the same, with some updates around the performance measures as that process has evolved over the last couple of years.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question? So the challenges and opportunities section, was that in the previous overview? We had one previously, but this is like basically new content for
Yes, Madam Chair and members, the challenges and opportunities section is really about trends and emerging issues. So that section needs a little bit more updating, primarily because it also sets up a lot of the studies that will be part of the work program. So we've studied a few of in fact, most of the issues that were identified in the challenges and opportunities section in the previous update, and now we need to refresh that so that we're previewing some of the work that's going to be done in advance for the next update, which will be 4 or 5 years down the road.
Got it. Thank you.
So we're going to spend a little time going specifically through the challenges and opportunities that have been identified in this plan, just so that you have an opportunity to discuss if you'd like, or ask any questions related to the content.
The first challenge and opportunity is in front of you, and it really talks about how our highway system and transit system are at different stages of development. And we know we have a well-developed and relatively complete highway system, but the issues related to the highway system are going to be around major reconstruction and reconfiguring of, excuse me, the way the highway system works. That is a little different with the transportation system, especially the Transitway system. We are still in significant development around that. So this just identifies that funding priorities and investment will go to those two systems or two aspects of our system in ways that focus on the needs that are relevant to that. And that's what the bullets here on the slide identify. So that is clearly an issue because we have a well-developed highway system. We're going to need to maintain it. We're going to need to put money into preserving our existing highway system. And the Transitway system, as I mentioned, is still in development, so there will be a lot of capital investment there that isn't just related to maintenance, but there are operations and maintenance costs as well. Are there any questions or thoughts about that? All right. The second challenge and opportunity identified is that we have seen significant changes in the travel patterns throughout the region, and those really have a big impact on how we use transportation in the region and what our expectations of that system are. So the data that we've been collecting about that behavior is highlighted in this section, and one of the things that we know that is noted on the slide is that many of the past trends in increased vehicle miles traveled, I'm going to get my acronyms right today, may not continue in the future because of certain trends that are being observed. So that's both a challenge and an opportunity in this plan, and we identify a few of those issues in this section. Any thoughts or questions about that? Great. The third challenge and opportunity is about highway congestion, which we all know is a reality of our region. The statement here is really to acknowledge that it is an issue, but that addressing congestion is a priority for the region, and there are lots of things that are going into the work that either in the managing of our highway system or in our investment plans that will be actively addressing those realities. And it wasn't as strongly stated perhaps in the previous plan that we are investing a lot of time and money in managing congestion and making sure that we're addressing those issues in our region. So we wanted to make sure that that was very clear. And the bullets you see on the slide here are really fundamental policies that have been in place for a long time in the region, but it's just a matter of stating them very clearly so that we're identifying this as a need and a clear opportunity for investment. Any thoughts about that? These are easy today. Fourth challenge and opportunity identified in the plan is that technology will continue to influence travel in the region. You all have had a number of conversations about the emergence of autonomous vehicles. This section does address what we know about that and what we're going to be looking at as we move forward in this region around this plan. But there are other elements of technology that are also impacting the travel and the planning in the region as it relates to that. Smartphones and applications that allow you to access sharing services, but also allow you to access real-time information about our system, either from the next transit bus that's coming on your route to the congestion that you're going to face on your route home. There are other vehicle technologies that have revolutionized the way we travel as well, including your ability to dial up where you want to go, either on your phone or on your GPS in your car. And there's emerging highway management technology too, which is sort of a jargony term for the signs that you see on the freeway when you're driving down that tell you what's coming up ahead, but also is actively managing areas of congestion, speed limits, things like that, that have really advanced in the past few years and will continue to do so. Any thoughts or questions about that?
I think one of the feedback items that I've heard from cities on kind of how we're dealing with planning overall for transportation planning overall and how we manage disruptive technology, whether it be kind of smartphones or autonomous vehicles, and whether or not there's additional guidance that we can provide communities in terms of how to think about parking ramps that could be multi-purpose if one day we no longer need parking ramps, if they become an antiquated relic of the time when we drove our own cars, or things like that in terms of land use. It seems like setting this up as a challenge or opportunity to me is we're saying that we don't necessarily have the answers to that at this time, and that's kind of the line that I use. But I would appreciate hearing from what we're thinking in terms of what we're going to include in the plan about how we help communities cope with the fact that these technologies are changing rapidly and really changing user behavior as well.
Madam Chair, members, I'll address that. One of the things we always do in our TPP is, can't remember the chapter number, but we provide a work program of items that we will be doing significant planning work on over the next 4 years previous to the next update of the TPP. Autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles is a very significant piece of that work program into the future. So one of the things we're really doing in this plan is setting up questions, both in the overview and then in some of the investment chapters. We have questions of how things we don't know the answer to, but that we're thinking about and we know will change as autonomous vehicles come into the picture. And then in the work program, we identify a number of areas that we will be doing specific work. And we have kind of started on that internally as staff already. And one of the things we'll be bringing to you probably summertime-ish is we are developing a matrix that takes the Transportation Policy Plan 6 goals, and then we've identified areas of activity, travel forecasting being one of them, revenue impacts, and then between the matrix, we're taking the activity versus the transportation policy goal and saying, what are the potential impacts of this and what might be the role of the council as the MPO in this area and what can we do? So one of the ones you brought up would be land use, which is one of our goals, transportation and land use, leveraging land use. So across that activity, providing information to cities, serving as a resource, and as expertise for cities to turn to, that might be a very good activity for the council as the MPO. So we don't have that fully developed yet, but we're starting on it. We're going to be coming back to you. And then another activity that we are working on is we have been talking about the need to just bring policymakers, not just yourselves, but CAB policymakers kind of up to speed on what is this realm of autonomous vehicles, what are the possibilities, what are we talking about, what are the timelines we might be thinking about. And so we're talking about hosting a workshop. Again, haven't set a date on that yet, but we're anticipating either early or late summer. If I had to guess, I'd say late summer. And that would just be, again, not answering questions, but bringing people together to identify issues and concerns and roles of different levels of government. That's kind of where we're focusing our work right now, but over the next 4 years, I can imagine we'll be doing a lot of detailed work in this area.
Thank you. Member Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recently went to a regional conference of mayors meeting where Tom Fisher, the dean at the architecture school, gave a presentation on the autonomous vehicles topic. And at the end, one of the mayors in the audience said, wait a minute, we're supposed to be doing our comp plan this year that was supposed to take us through 2040, and you're telling us everything is going to completely change in the next 10 years. So yes, we get a lot of questions about this.
Yep. Member Munt.
Madam Chair, ladies, one of the things that provoked thought for me was on page 17, the elements that influence changes. And you talk about how much of our incomes we can afford to spend on transportation costs. For me, one of the pivotal moments in talking about affordable housing was when folks said, you know, persons shouldn't have to spend more than 30% of their income on shelter. I wonder if there's ever been discussion about how much a person should have to spend on transportation, you know? To me, that would help us have a discussion about where subsidies are necessary, where they aren't. I'm interested in that kind of a discussion.
Madam Chair and members, Councilmember Munn. I don't have a detailed response for you. I do know there has been a lot of work done by an organization out of Chicago that looks at mortgage financing and the idea of combining what you spend on both housing and transportation, or your income with transportation, and the idea that if you live near transit and you have one less vehicle and can demonstrate that you have more income due to that, that you might qualify for a higher level of a mortgage. And so they've done some work combining housing and transportation together. I'm not sure that I've ever seen something that just looked at transportation alone and said, this is what's appropriate to spend on transportation. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I don't have any data to add.
Location efficient mortgage.
Thank you.
Great. So then the last challenge and opportunity identified is really relates this plan more specifically to some of our Thrive outcomes, specifically that it is essential to advancing equity, sustainability, and prosperity in our region. So what this does is it isn't intended to be a comprehensive sort of bucket of stuff, but it is highlighting a handful of key issues that relate to equity, sustainability, and prosperity, and how transportation planning and this plan in particular begin to address some of those issues, or at least ask the right questions, as Amy noted before. That's really the key piece of this challenges and opportunities section, is to begin asking some of those questions regionally, so we can either come up with answers or look for things to start to answer things. And these are not new themes that, to any of you, they're fairly consistent with what's been in the previous plan and also what's in Thrive MSP 2040, but access to housing and amenities is a key thing. Having equitable policies and outcomes as it relates to not just our funding, but our plans, the environmental impact of transportation, and that is a big piece of the transportation policy plan, evaluating the impact on our overall air quality and other things, and that addresses some of the standards that are present in the requirements for planning. And then to further emphasize the need for access to jobs and educational opportunities as a key piece of how people can be prosperous in our region, and the transportation link to that is critical.
So in some of our previous presentations, we saw kind of a very clear picture of what the overall funding situation looks like from especially a roadway perspective, but also on the transit side, and understanding that those are kind of two different buckets of money that are really separate. How does the overall funding picture fit into the challenges and opportunities section? I haven't had a chance to read the actual text, so I'm just kind of curious. It doesn't seem highlighted in the...
Right. Madam Chair and members, the investment section does talk about that pretty extensively, and there are some introductory pieces in the beginning of the plan that highlight that we do not have sufficient resources to meet the needs of our region moving into the future. That's not specifically identified in the challenges and opportunities section by itself, but there are themes running through all of them that relate to sufficient funding and assuring that our priorities are related to all of these, to addressing all of these challenges and opportunities. But it is much more explicit in the investment section and in some of the introductory pieces in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go back to what we're doing with the overview that you might not actually see in this draft, because we're trying to, we wanted to get the content in place, and now we're going to work on some of the illustrations. In the previous version of this plan, we had a lot of travel behavior data and graphs and charts related to the investments. We're trying to expand a little bit to see if we can better illustrate visually some of the more complicated processes that relate to transportation planning, and to the point you made, Madam Chair, about investments, how complicated that whole, stream of funding is. So we're still working on those things, but you'll see those in future versions of the plan. There are also other elements that we'll be using to illustrate, including shorter sidebars that explain or define some of these, technical things that are still relevant to the overview of the plan, but might need some illustration. And we're hoping to inject some real world experiences to do some storytelling around what people are experiencing here in the region. And we're gathering that information now. So you'll be seeing that again in future versions of this plan. I just want to highlight for you, there is a section that's required in the transportation policy plan that highlights how we've engaged constituencies. The placeholder that you see now is a new feature of the transportation plan that we're kind of excited about, where we've really tried to capture all of the engagement that happened during these planning studies that Amy referred to before that are part of the work program. Previously, we didn't necessarily take the time to capture all of that data from all of those interactions, and there are hundreds and thousands of them. So we really wanted to include that because it's such a fundamental part of the policy that gets established in the transportation plan. It should be accounted for and it should be acknowledged, and it's a lot of effort by regular folks who live in our region and work in our region, but also the counties, cities, and state and federal agencies that participate in all of these processes. So that's a pretty big deal. And we're going to try to continue to include that information moving forward so that we're acknowledging the efforts and the time, really, the valuable time spent there. There will be a lot more outreach and engagement on the draft when it is released. As Amy mentioned, that'll be this summer, and we'll be beginning some of that stuff sooner than that. So we're going to be interested in hearing what people think about this. But again, because it's a fairly limited update, it gives us an opportunity to perhaps dig a little deeper or delve a little deeper with certain constituencies on some of these issues. So that's a good thing too. And that is the end of my portion. Does anybody have any questions about the overview or any of the things we've talked about today?
Any questions?
So we'll move from kind of the challenges and opportunities to the investment portion. And some of this might be a little repetitive from what you've heard in the past, but I'm a believer in repeating things. And somewhat to the point of your question, Chair Shumaroff, of investment. So in many respects, I think of our plan as an investment plan. That really is the purpose of the plan, is to let our communities and the public know how we're going to invest in transportation into the future. And that is the primary purpose under federal law, too. So investment flows across the entire plan. It's not identified specifically as an opportunity or challenge, but if you read the investment sections, it repeatedly talks about specifically the lack of funding and how that continues to be such a major impediment to developing our transportation system, whether it's transit or highways. And when you asked that question, I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, we probably are getting a little immune to this because that has been the challenge to our region for the past 20 years. So it's not just this plan, it's not the last plan, it's the plan before that. It just is something we have kind of learned to live with, and I don't think there are very many people around who think that that challenge is ever going to be completely solved. We make little headway here and there, but it would take a lot of money and a lot of investment to really take us to where many of us think we need to go. So that's just a little soliloquy on funding overall. But one of the things about having a lack of funding is that we have a reduced ability to address congestion and provide alternatives. And we felt that this year. Council specifically was criticized for lack of investment in congestion, and I would suggest that's just a reality of when funding gets tight. We know we have to preserve and maintain the system, and expansion and new things take the back seat to preserving what we already have today. And within this plan, that will continue to be a theme, that our first priority for investment is to maintain and preserve what we have today. The place that I think maybe we feel this most heavily is in our base bus system. So we do have some ability to grow our Transitway system, and we talk about that within the plan, whether it's federal funding or local funding. But really, it's the base bus system, and we forecast that we will be able to maintain and preserve the operations that we have on the street today. But the idea of how we will ever expand our base bus system, particularly given that the county sales tax has now kind of been implemented, and the sales tax, is that still an option for the base bus system? Is it not? What are the alternatives for funding the base bus system?
Sure.
We do need some investigation into that issue. And one of the things we've encountered in our back and forth with TAC planning and our local partners is that we know as these comp plans are being updated, there's a very high expectation that bus service will increase. And in fact, many communities are developing comprehensive plans that talk about transit oriented development, greater density, mixed use, and there is a very clear expectation that transit service will come with some of these changes in land use. And at this point in time, while we want to encourage the local communities to do that, we really don't have the ability to give them any hope for how we would fund additional services into these growing areas. So with that, one of the changes that has occurred is the county sales tax. And we certainly, this is a fairly significant amount of funding that is now available for expansion, primarily of the Transitway system, but also potentially of MnDOT's highway system. And that really brings us into a new era of transportation funding. So in the past, the regional systems, whether it was highways or transitways, were always funded by what we considered regional revenues, state revenues, things that were raised specifically for those purposes. And now we have a local funding source that will clearly be used to help develop both the regional transitway system and the regional highway system, MnDOT system. And so how that happens and occurs into the future is new, but it also requires new partnerships with the counties in particular, because they are the ones who have some ability to fund expansion projects at the moment. And then the third kind of big investment theme that we highlight here is despite we don't have enough revenue, but then as we look out into the future, we also know that our buying power continues to be reduced. So the revenues grow at a much slower growth rate than we are seeing in the cost of actually providing major projects, the spending of MnDOT, and the cost to provide major transitway development. So while we do have revenue growth, it doesn't keep up with the spending inflation, and over time, it severely erodes our buying power. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve to give you the good news about what we are able to invest in over time.
Good, thank you. So you may remember last December, we talked about the declining amount of money going to the metro region. We talked about 10 years out from now, this slow decline as more of the money is going to preserving our pavements and bridges, and most of those pavement and bridge miles are in greater Minnesota versus the metro. So over time, that results in a lot of money being shifted from what would have gone here for congestion relief or safety or bike ped improvements, is shifting to the pavements and bridges in greater Minnesota. So we've had a number of conversations with MnDOT over the last several months, and they have agreed to take another look at it. And in fact, they've come up with a short-term solution here where they're providing another $50 million per year for 3 years, so $150 million towards congestion relief or mobility funding. So that will extend out to 2026. And in addition to that, shown on the screen, another 20 to 30 million per year going out to the life of the plan, out to 2040. And that really funds those low-cost, high-benefit projects, those spot mobility projects on our system. We were funding that in about 20 million per year, and that gets a number of projects across the system done. So that funding stream, which is the sales tax on the used auto parts, is where that new funding comes from. The first $150 million a year comes from delaying some pavement improvements over that time period, 2024 to 2026. So in addition to that, there's roughly $200 million available from corridors of commerce, which is yet to be selected, probably in late April early May. And so we're holding off on making a recommendation on what to do with that $150 million until we see what comes out of corridors of commerce, and then may build on the projects that are selected there, or look at spreading those dollars across the region in different ways. But so we found out about this new money, but haven't made any recommendations on where that might be spent until corridors of commerce is selected.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So I think I recall last time we talked about this, we were at about 42.6% of the overall MNCHIP allocation for investments, and that to allocate that was I think looking into the future was declining from 42.6% to like 20 something percent in 2023. I can't remember the years. I might be messing up the statistics. How does this new money shift the overall percent when we look into from 2022 beyond? Does this mean that we're now more like 30%, or are we getting closer to the 42%? I mean, a little bit closer.
Yeah.
How much closer?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So what this does for the most part is pushes the problem out 3 years.
Okay.
And so we're going to be pretty close to that 42.6%, and the 50 million per year extends that out. And by doing so, MnDOT's plan, the MNCHIP plan, Highway Investment Plan, will be redone during this time period before 2026. So we'll have an opportunity to revisit the issue with MnDOT and hopefully make some changes. So this was really meant to buy some time to have some deeper conversations. But as you know, projects are developed long in advance, so we needed at least some assurance out for several years that funding stream was going to continue.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. And then the two major changes on the highway side, we discussed this in December too. One are all the studies that we've done in cooperation with MnDOT since the last TPP, and then the second is some of the funding changes that Amy discussed earlier at all levels of government. So one of the big ones was the MinPass system study, the third system study that was done. And we wanted to highlight this map because 5 of the projects that you voted that the council would submit for corridors of commerce did in fact come off of this list. 5 of those projects were MinPass projects, so it's conceivable that corridors of commerce could fund one or more of these projects, or that $150 million of new mobility money could go out to pay for 1 or 2 more MinPass lanes between now and 2026. And then lastly, on the highway side, we wanted to highlight the work program because there's several items on there that we're already starting to work on. The first 2 bullet points, one is the congestion management process, the CMP. We have a federal deadline of March 2019. So we currently have a procurement out to have a consultant help us on that. And then the system-to-system interchange study where 2 freeways come together. We're doing a prioritization effort there. That's another one we're working with MnDOT on, and that is expected to start already this summer, and hopefully we'll have results in about 1.5 years' time there. So, and then connected autonomous vehicles, we try and get that on just about every slide we can. So there it is again. We'll pause there, and I think I'll switch spots with Cole and let him.
Are there any other questions on the highway investment? We were very appreciative, and we've expressed that to MnDOT, that while the new money is just short-term, it doesn't solve our long-term problem. It was a very big move on their part, and so we've tried to express our gratitude for that shift that they were able to make.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Cole Henniker. Connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, I'll just get that out of the way. I'll just say it so I don't have to say it in the rest of my presentation. But, for the fiscal outlook for transit, I think Amy covered a lot of this, and you guys are fairly aware of some of the challenges we have in the near term, but our plan assumes a pretty consistent growth rate for our transit resources that allows us to maintain the existing system. And the one thing I wanted to highlight here is that second bullet there, regional solicitation funding continues to be the primary source for expansion, particularly of the bus system. And for those of you who don't follow that too closely, it's been the primary source of funding for a lot of our expansion in the region recently. It's been a huge source of funding for arterial bus rapid transit. It's funded a lot of our high frequency improvement changes over the last few years. and it also funded a lot of our park and ride expansion in the 2000s and late 90s. So you continue to see that that's going to be a very competitive pot amongst all the providers in the region, just because it is primarily the only source to expand the bus system. Moving into the Transitway section, we had a conversation at the last meeting, the Committee of the Whole, down in lower level B, about these maps. And I wanted to show you the new versions because we had a pretty substantial change here to go away from the colored branding scheme on our planning map and focus on the status of the corridors. So you'll see that change reflected here. We talk about the corridors in black being the existing system, and then the green are the funded current revenue scenario transitways in the plan. A couple of other changes that we made since you last saw this map. We've updated the arterial BRT assumptions in the plan to show some of the corridors that have partial funding but are not fully funded. So that includes Chicago, Hennepin, and Lake Street. Those corridors are now identified as partially funded BRT projects and hopefully going to be fully funded in the near future. There has been a substantial conversation revolving around the D line because the council is recommending a bonding request in this session. So given the schedule of the plan, if the bonding request for D line is satisfied by the state, we would be able to bring that project into the plan. But at this time, it's just a partially funded project until the state comes through with their share. And that's a pretty significant change, just not assuming state bonding funds for these projects until they're awarded. And a couple other notes there. The Rush Line LPA is the only new project in terms of a large-scale transitway in our plan. And Riverview Project, while they have a draft LPA recommendation, there's a couple of other steps they have to go through before they can be included in the plan. So that will actually have to be amended in the next phase, which Ramsey County is well aware of. So they are not expecting to be included in this plan at this time. The increased revenue scenario for transit is a slightly more complicated map, but again, we're trying to illustrate for the user what the different status of corridors is. So you continue to see the same corridors that were on the previous map, but what we've added here are the, I guess I'll say, purplish lines. And the darker ones indicate corridors where a study recommendation has been made. So there's a recommendation out there. It is not funded, but it is what we call an LPA recommendation out on the street that could be considered. The lighter purple corridors are the ones where there is a study needs to still make a recommendation. So those are corridors that have shown high potential for transitway service, but there hasn't been a detailed analysis enough to recommend a particular mode in their line. And so that helps anybody who's looking at our plan understand the various statuses of the corridors just by looking at the map. We are tiering a lot of the transitways into that category of status in the plan, and there's a description of each of them, as well as a description of the most latest work on that corridor, so that anyone who's reading our plan would know, at least when it's adopted, where those corridors were at that time. And then there are, of course, additional arterial BRT also listed in this plan that includes the full network, and those are all included on this map as well. So this is the increased revenue scenario for transitways. Similar to Steve's discussion, we do have some work program items on transit. One of the ones that we're excited about getting started is, and this is kind of a working title for it, but the service allocation strategy would look at how this region allocates all of its bus service between productive routes and routes that serve more of a coverage role, a geographic balance role. And we want to determine if we're really doing the right mix of that and what the outcomes might be under different mixes. So we're going to look at a couple of different scenarios and see how service and efficiency would change if we had more routes in suburban areas, but which would then take away from the service that we have in the core today, and just see what those trade-offs might be and be able to talk about them better by developing some numbers behind those. In doing that, we're also going to look at some underserved markets today, trying to establish areas that maybe have high demand that are not being served adequately today, and prioritize markets, not necessarily routes, but markets. And then again, part of that is looking at first and last mile connections. We realize that we hear this all the time from our stakeholders that jobs are moving to the suburbs. They're not getting the transit service needed to bring employees out there. Is there other ways that we can look at that to be more adaptive to that new reality? And so we do want to explore that and continue to explore different transit service delivery models to address that. The transit advantages piece is an interesting one where we think that arterial BRT is going to take care of a lot of issues in some of our highest demand routes, but there are a lot of other local routes out there that also suffer from reliability and travel time issues. And this would look at opportunities to address some of those. So this will actually be a piece that may recommend changes to local roads based on what the buses need and let local governments consider those when they're rebuilding roads. And so it'll take a pretty comprehensive look at issues with travel time and reliability on the bus system and seeing if there's any improvements that can be made. I think those are really the highest profile and I would say the coolest work program items. So I didn't want to address any more, and that's the end of the transit section. I do have one more slide, but I just wanted to kind of end right there to see if there's any questions before I move on to the next slide.
Go ahead.
So we had a couple of offshoot changes that we wanted to highlight for this group that came out of comments from our TAC planning partners. For the regional bicycle barriers study, this study is just kind of wrapping up in the last few months. And we had originally put a map of what we call bicycle, I got to look at my notes here, bicycle barrier crossing improvement areas, which were intended to be areas that we think are the highest priority for addressing barriers to bicycling in the region. Because that study is very fresh and the results of it were really new, some of our partners that participated in that have said that they don't think it's perfect yet. They think there's some data quality issues that we need to work through. So we're going to actually be removing that map and we're going to replace it with a map of the barriers themselves, things like railroads, streams, and freeways. And then we're going to talk about how that would be refined over the next couple of months, possibly years, prior to it ever being used in the regional solicitation. The intent was always to use this in the regional solicitation starting in 2020, so we do have some time to refine it and make sure that our local partners are comfortable with it. And that just required us to tweak some of the language in the TPP to be responsive to those comments. And so we are working on those changes right now, but that's a change since I think the last time we were here, we were talking about putting that in the plan, but we really have to make sure that the data is right before it goes into the plan. So that's a change that we will be making. And then the last one there, I think it was in December or so that this board adopted the transit or the state, I guess I don't even know how to say it, but the state funding allocation block grant program for transit providers. And that program essentially says that we are going to give block grants to transit providers to satisfy their current needs for operating service from state funding. And in doing so, the Regional Service Improvement Plan, which was always intended to guide our investments if we got more motor vehicle sales tax to allow us to expand as a region, no longer becomes relevant. And so what we're doing is we're shifting that to, if we got money that's not state money, we would use the Regional Service Improvement Plan. But as it's currently laid out in policy, new money actually flows through that policy first. And so the Regional Service Improvement Plan is not a part of that. And that was a change that we worked through with the providers, recognizing that that was a policy that was adopted actually while we were drafting the TPP. So we had to be kind of dynamic to change that. And then shifting that focus to the increased revenue scenario. So we're not removing the Regional Service Improvement Plan discussion, and the region could still do one. It just wouldn't necessarily impact the state funding based on that new policy. Any questions about that? Next one, you.
Yep. So as we have been going along the past few months, we have been doing a lot of outreach with our local partners and particularly the counties. This summer we went and had meetings with technical county staff, and then since about November, December, we've been going out and scheduling with the county boards, going to work group sessions. We've visited 5 counties so far. We are at Elk River tomorrow night with our 7W partners in Sherburne and Wright counties. And then Anoka and Hennepin are in later February, maybe early March. I think one is getting rescheduled to March. The good news is that those county meetings have been going, I think, extremely well. We've been getting really good feedback, both from the technical people and from the policymakers. And at this point in time, we're feeling like a lot of the issues that they bring up, we've been working through and satisfying people's questions. And we're going to continue to do that. We're scheduling with Minneapolis and St. Paul too. And as I said earlier, we welcome if you're hearing something from the local partners, we want to get out in front of those issues and really make sure we're responsive to their concerns and address them before we put the TPP out for public comment. And thus far, I fingers crossed, I think it's all going pretty well. The one thing that we indicated earlier, we're moving through the process in March and April, and then we're going to have a little bit of a pause to wait for MnDOT to make its decision on the corridors of commerce funding. So we will get recommendations from TAB and TAC on moving the TPP forward. And then in May, when we know what those major projects are, we will add them into the plan, which will be mainly fiscal changes and then listing the projects. Bring it to the council, Transportation Committee and Council for recommendation in June, and circle back to TAB and TAC to make sure that they know and understand the changes that we've made due to corridors of commerce and highway funding. And then we will be in public comment through most of the summer, have a public comment report and revise the TPP again in response to those comments, and be back in front of TAB, Transportation Committee, and the full council, hopefully by early October, for full adoption of the plan. And right now, that's the schedule. I'm not going to say it won't change, because corridors of commerce is still a little bit in limbo and might push us out a few more weeks from what you're seeing here.
Great. Thank you for the update. Any other questions or comments on this? Member Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This morning I attended the 494 Corridor Commission's annual legislative breakfast and had a presentation from Melissa Madison at 494 Commuter Services, and the question came up from one of the legislators, which one, but with us coming into attainment for CMAQ, have we started to plan for what the financial impact is on our TMOs? How we're going to backfill if for any CMAQ money we lose as a result?
Madam Chair and Council Member Elkins, we have, so the attainment right now is expected fall of 2019. When MnDOT does its planning for funding, they tend to go out, I think right now we're going out to 2023 or 2024. So we have been having conversations with MnDOT about what this might mean for the state in total. For those of you who aren't aware, right now the metro area, because we're the only area not in attainment, we get the full CMAQ allocation that comes to the state, which is about $30 million a year. And that is what is used in the regional solicitation primarily to fund transit projects and also the TMOs. So at this point in time, we know CMAQ might be reduced, but MnDOT has been discussing with us that they're hoping to find a way to try to keep our level of funding, whatever the source, at essentially the same level of funding. And the regional solicitation has kind of moved into that direction anyway, where we fund modal projects. We don't fund by the revenue source any longer. I can't guarantee that it won't go down or due to a decreased level of funding. We'll always get a base level of CMAQ, but it's quite a bit. It's maybe in half or something from what it is today. So we don't know what that impact will be, but if there is an impact, I'm guessing MnDOT will phase it in so it's not a severe impact all at once.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, thank you so much for the update.
Great.
I think the last item on our agenda is reports from council members. Council members, do you have any reports you'd like to share Member Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to report that the Metro Mobility Task Force completed their work, and on February 7th, the group voted unanimously to approve the report and the recommendations, which was forwarded to the legislature today. So the report overall will be posted on the Metro Mobility Task Force website so everyone can easily access it, but it focuses on a description of the services and ways to improve service, limit costs, and improve efficiency. It was a very, very successful work group. I think I was quite impressed with the collaborative efforts from a very wide-ranging group of interests, and really want to recognize our staff who did an incredible job putting a lot of information together in a very short time. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for serving on that. Thank you. Member Lutovsky.
Thank you. Just a couple things I wanted to report on. I was able to take the chair spot at the Downtown Council annual meeting a couple of days ago. And so that was enjoyable. They made the big announcement that there are now 43,000 people living in downtown Minneapolis, which is just unbelievable growth. And of course, it's not over yet. The building is still happening. So there was also a story about that in the paper today. The other thing is the city of Minneapolis sponsored this Community Connections Conference over the weekend. And so I attended that and went to the breakout session on the census, and was able to connect with the city and the demographer's office. And they're really hoping that the Met Council will be a partner on the census. And I know that there's some staff conversation happening around it. And they particularly thought help with figuring out what messages are going to resonate with communities who are scared to fill out the census, and resources to hard to reach communities. So wanted to report on those things.
Thank you. Member Munt.
Madam Chair, Deb and I had the chance to join Carver County for their legislative briefing, and we share common ground in hoping that there's additional funding for Highway 101's Bluff and for Regional Park Capital. Also went to the state of Minnetonka, and they have a new mayor, new city councilors who are really excited about working with the council on affordable housing and light rail transit issues.
Great, excellent. Member Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a Housing for All conference, and it was hosted by Roxanne Smith, former council member. And Councilmember Rodriguez and I attended that. That was well attended. A lot of local folks there, and local elected officials all said a few words. I think Maple Grove is doing really well, and you know it's a community that's growing amazingly fast, and they are sensitive to affordable housing, and that came out clear in that conference that they're doing well. Another meeting that I attended, Councilmember Dorfman did as well. It was the Blue Line Extension meeting, and it was hosted by the City of Crystal, and that was very well attended. There was mayors from all the mayors along the corridor and local legislators, and you know it's evident that there's strong support by all the local officials for that transitway.
Thank you. Member Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Schreiber and I hosted a thank you breakfast, an appreciation breakfast for the volunteers that serve on our advisory committees for both our districts. And shout out to Andrew for coordinating that for us. It was great. It was a lot of good information sharing. I've heard back from all of them about how much they appreciated it. So
excellent. Great. Member Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was able last week to participate in an unveiling of a small area plan that's been developed in the Frogtown part of St. Paul, and the document is really unique in the sense that it's a graphic novel format essentially, and so it's an entirely graphic presentation of all of this very rich process of taking in and developing community will about what are the goals for this particular part of the city. It was really an exciting event. Lots of kids, lots of young people, and lots of enthusiasm. I understand the council did have a role in supporting some part of that work, and I wish I had a little more detail about that to share with you, but it was really a privilege to be able to join them. Thanks.
Excellent. Member Melander.
Sandy and I attended an event last week with Fresh Energy that's talked about impact investing and really has created a group now that's going to start to look at if in fact that's something that regional pension funds might do that's happening around the country where people make investments that focus on clean energy and just providing funding for public and private partnerships. And then I've just had a couple of conversations with staff recently with Senator Uyghur and Senator Chamberlain about Northeast Metro issues. Great, thank you. Any other updates, Member Dorfman?
Thank you. I just want to mention, starting with your the celebration and your remarks at our 50th anniversary party, stressing the importance of affordable housing and the work we're doing here to be part of this discussion. Mayor Fry at the Downtown Council event, that was the key issue that he stressed. At the St. Louis Park legislative meeting that I recently attended, first on their list. And so it's gratifying. I mean, clearly there's this recognition that this is a major issue for the region, that it is a regional issue, and that we're all talking about, in addition, of course, to the governor having a task force looking at these issues too. So it's good.
Excellent. Member Elkins.
Piggyback on that, I addressed the Edina Rotary Club last week for our lunchtime, kind of a Met Council 101. And learned that that Rotary Club had also financially contributed to the 66 West Affordable Housing Project in Edina. We're strong supporters of it, so it gave us a connection. But it was the presentation, and Zoe Mullendor helped me put it together, did most of the work. But it was well enough received that they want an encore now. They want Libby and Todd to go back and talk more about demographics.
Great. Member Rodriguez.
Yes, I probably should have asked. I'm wondering if the next TPP update could be a graphic novel.
That's great.
New crayons.
Any other?
Can I say?
Sure.
I just want to compliment you on your presentation at the 50th.
Yes.
You did a great job. You came across great, and I think the message was a good one. So nice work.
Thank you. I thought it was a really fun way to celebrate the work of the Met Council, the staff, and I think that staff did a really phenomenal job putting the event together as well. And I thought that the panel was really interesting too, kind of have past chairs reflecting on the work of the council. So I think overall it was a great event. Any other comments or updates? I think Member Commerce and I had the opportunity to visit with the mayor, new Mayor Carter and Deputy Mayor of St. Paul, which was a great opportunity to kind of hear from them about what some of their priorities are as they're putting together their administration. I think affordable housing is a key issue as well in the city of St. Paul. We'll be speaking later this week at the Minnesota Chamber Leadership class on Friday to talk about autonomous vehicles and disruptive technology in transportation with MnDOT, so that should be something to look forward to. I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Counsel. Do you have an update that you'd like to share?
I do have an update, Madam Chair, Council members. I am very excited to introduce Darcy Erickson in the yellow sweater. She's the newest lawyer addition to our team. Comes to us with several years in private practice representing municipalities and landowners, and we are just thrilled to have her. And by way of a little context, Dan Abelson, who's sitting next to her, will be hitting his 7-year anniversary in May.
Oh,
so
nice.
This doesn't happen often, and we are very excited to have such talented help. So thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Member Dorfman.
I went to high school with Dan's mother, so I no CSG.
And I am remiss, I skipped over our regional administrator for his update.
I'll just very quickly say the Metropolitan Council and Department of Transportation were added to the Governor's Children's Cabinet. And so we had an opportunity to go to that the other day. And in keeping with the theme, one of the things that they told us, the two issues that keep coming up in their discussions, because in part, if you're going to support children, you have to support families. You have to have stable housing and transportation. They said that comes up over and over in that group. So while we don't have a lot of programs that directly serve children, we do a lot of things to support families and families